So, for lack of a better trio, we're like Peter, Paul, and Mary, in that it takes a community to build a road. And this is something you may not want to leave to the bureaucrats all the time, even though I am one. It definitely takes a systems level approach. We'll talk about some current projects that the city is working on to move towards the complete streets era. And of course, then we'll talk with Sarah, have Sarah Merrill talk about complete streets by the numbers, why we need them, and then Justin's going to talk about going for the gold, Hamilton's bike-friendly community status, and the need for complete streets. Very quickly, 57%. You know where I'm going with this? 57% of all trips 1 kilometer or less taken in the city are by automobile. So more than half the trips that we take that are 1 kilometer. So this represents a huge potential for growth. Now we can transfer at least half of these trips to walking, cycling, and taking transit. So we have a lot of potential. We have a lot of work to do. So why is this the case? Well, at some points, infrastructure doesn't meet the needs of all the people in the city, or maybe it doesn't even exist. You know, if you live in a rural area, you may not have sidewalks. Hamilton is an amalgamated city, so we have a varying level of infrastructure depending on where we are. There's an auto-oriented culture, not just in Hamilton, but in all of North America. So we are, following that trend, although that trend is about to change. We'll talk about that later. There's a lack of congestion, so there's a lot of capacity on the roadway, which makes it easy to drive your car. There's a high amount of car ownership. Those two things go together. And there's a lack of awareness of the health impact. The automobile is probably one of the greatest threats to public health, but people don't see that their automobile use is something that's affecting their health negatively. So what are complete streets and how can they help? They're very basically streets that meet the needs of all road users of all ages and abilities. So as you can see, there's some engineering work happening there. There's a lot of measurements. No street is created equal. Not every street can have a bike lane, a pedestrian refuge, buffer zones and street trees. They're not maybe all two-way, but at some point, every street needs to have taken a complete street approach. Some rural streets may just have paved shoulders. Some arterials will have to have segregated bike facilities like Cannon Street, for instance. So it really depends on the street, but ultimately, when we take the lens, when we go and redo that street and we look at the street, we are looking at the perspective of all road users. Who are they? What are the, conflicts? Well, you have cyclists versus pedestrians versus transit users versus auto drivers versus goods movement. Well, they can be complementary. They all can compete with each other for road space, right? You want to have extra wide sidewalks. How can you accommodate the bike lane, as an example? We've got young persons and older adults. Both need to be accommodated as well as everyone in the middle. We have persons with mobility challenges. And then we have the size of the road itself and the amount of traffic on the road. So a lot of varying things that are taking place at once in terms of how we're designing this road to be complete. Is this a complete street from the definition I just gave? No, right? It's a bit of a fail. This is not Hamilton, thankfully. There's no pedestrian facility and accommodation. Look at that bus stop there. How are you even getting to them? So that's an example. We're not really in that situation. Here's another one of my favorite ones, sidewalks nowhere. I don't need to ask, obviously it's a fail. There's a lot going on in this scene. There's a road that keeps going, but a sidewalk that stops. Probably it'll be developed later. There might be development going on in another year or two, but for now it stops. There's that sign there that makes me very wary of how that child's going to move further past that sign. Another sign I really love is this one. Beware of cyclists and pedestrians. So there's something to be worried about and beware of. So this is the current North American context. Again, thankfully not Hamilton. And that's why this guy's a little bit more happy. Because, Hamilton is better off than many North American city centers. We're not perfect, but we're better off. And of course, we're really working towards that new paradigm. We've just approved our pedestrian mobility plan. I'll talk about in a second. We're going to update our transportation master plan. We have a variety of quick wins projects going on. And of course, bike lanes and bike parking is all the rage these days. But it's a balancing act. Complete streets are always a balancing act, like I talked about before in terms of road space. It also is not a silver bullet. There's behavior change. Are people willing to change their behavior in the first place? Parking. If parking is free, no matter how complete the street is, people may choose to drive. Same thing with capacity. There's land use considerations. Are there things to walk to on the street? There's congestion itself. Is it there? Are people trying to take transit because it's too hard to drive your car? There are health issues as well. So all these things really combine in the complete streets debate. In terms of our current projects, one that the city manager even mentioned himself, is our pedestrian mobility plan. What's key about this, different from our cycling master plan, it's not these are pedestrian streets and these are not pedestrian streets. Every street is a pedestrian street. That means we have now a walkability toolbox that says on every street project we do, we can look at things along the street, like what I have here. I've got a road dike, making the lanes smaller to decrease the speed of traffic, improve sidewalks, etc. Or crossing the street, which is another big one. We've seen some new crosswalks in Hamilton, the zebra crossings that are here in some of the pictures. We can do mid-block crossings. We can do bump outs to make here on the right here, to make the distance shorter. So this is going to happen now on every street regardless. So it's a policy move, but it's also very technical, as it is a toolbox. And maybe we'll talk a little bit more about how policy has to become implementation. So anything that sounds very nice in a policy needs to become something technical that we can actually implement on the street. In terms of our quick wins project, we're working with Metrolinx on these projects. This one's our enhanced transit stops, 15 new stops on the A line and the B line. Of course, you can see already they have pedestrian amenities, they have cycling amenities, they accommodate larger buses. The stations themselves are more inviting. They have next bus announcements on them as well. Hamilton Bike Shares was near my heart, it's my project, but it's 750 bikes, 100 hubs. They're going to help change how people interact with the street. And they go from Dundas to the stadium in the lower city. There's the bus-only pilot project. You've probably heard about this. Maybe you blamed your commute times on the bus-only lane. It's a one-year pilot now with fresh paint, so you can see it again. But you know what? It's a good test of different elements of complete streets. That's what we're trying to do. You've got to test it out. The Strategic Road Safety Program. You probably see these zebra crossings. Law Street as an example. I call it from tactical urbanism to city action. So this is where really the community and the city ended up working together very successfully. But it's part of an overall program that we're working on. We've applied the complete streets approach in more of an ad hoc fashion right now. This is Victoria Avenue. You can see buffered bike lanes and parking buffer the pedestrians. It's still one-way traffic. This is York Boulevard. Yes, a small section of it, but a really good example of what we can do with that toolbox and complete streets, wide sidewalks, marked crossings, transit bay, bicycle parking, bike lanes, etc., etc. and go on. So, good example. We need now to apply that more regularly on other streets. We've got the North End traffic management plan. We're reducing the speed limit, but also putting in infrastructure that makes that a reality. Signs don't change people's behavior. Infrastructure does. So you match that 30 kilometers with actual bump outs and bike lanes and boulevards and special crossings. Like I said, we're not that bad. We're not worse off. We're better off than many. We have silver designations both in the Walk Friendly Ontario program and the Bicycle Friendly Community program. There are a lot of bronze out there. There is not as much silver and gold. So every time we think that we're not doing as well as we could, which is the truth, we are more than and better than average. So it's something to take pride in. And of course, how do we operationalize, institutionalize this? Because it's great to have ad hoc programs and it's great to talk about it here and talk about policy and implementation. But it really comes down to the master plan that's going to take a complete streets, have a complete streets foundation, which will be very important. It talks about these, these in generalities, but the next 5-year plan is going to talk about it as a basis of the plan. And of course, it'll have extensive public engagement. So that's how we operationalize in policy, but then it has to become a manual because again, someone needs to actually go and design that street. And that's going to be really key. So once we have our TMP updated, we've got our toolboxes. Now, as every street comes up for renewal, we need to take an approach that looks at that street and understands why it needs to become more complete.